The Honorable John A. Boehner of the state of Ohio, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 113th Congress.
A feel-good moment for John Boehner there, reelected by his fellow Republicans as House Speaker today, but it was not without a little bit of drama, more than he expected. Boehner was supposed to get the vote of every Republican congressman, or at least the overwhelming majority. He did get the overwhelming majority, but not all of them. Defections put Boehner's vote count at 220 in a conference of 233 Republicans, meaning 13 Republicans voted for somebody else. And for a few moments, it even looked like a second ballot might be necessary, something that hasn't happened for 90 years. In the end, though, Boehner still won the day as expected. But will today's election end up being the high point for the Speaker in this new session? In 2011, Boehner worked out a debt limit deal with President Obama, only to see it rejected by his members. Then late in 2012, he came up with the Plan B alternative to the debt limit debate, but he got stopped short when he couldn't come up with the votes to pass it. He did manage to pass the eventual fiscal cliff deal, but with more Democrats voting in favor than Republicans, his caucus voted nearly 2-1 against. And then Tuesday night was the mini rebellion against Boehner after Boehner refused to allow a vote on aid for victims of Hurricane Sandy. And so, Gian-Carlo, let me start with you. For all of the noise and complaints that we've heard about John Boehner, why wasn't he booted as Speaker today?
Well, I think that his caucus understood that he was in a pretty tough spot. And I think that even those who voted against his $1 million fiscal cliff deal, as well as the ultimate $400,000 cliff deal, there wasn't necessarily animus toward him for that. I think even those that voted against the deal understood that he was making the best of a bad situation. So I don't think it was ever personal with him. There's no issues of impropriety or ethics, or by most accounts, he's a very well-liked leader among his colleagues in the House. And I think, those that voted against him did what they had to do, but the personal animosity isn't there.
But if your title is leader and you turn around behind you to see who's following you and there's a bunch of people not there, are you really still the leader?
Well, he lost 13 votes out of, 233. I mean, let's put it in perspective.
Guys?
Well, I wouldn't want to be Speaker Boehner, and the reason why I wouldn't want to be in his position, if you're Harry Reid, if you're Nancy Pelosi, if you're President Obama, I mean, frankly, what does his word mean? No matter what he negotiates, he can't deliver it. That history has shown that repeatedly. No matter what he says at the bargaining table, he can't deliver his caucus. And if a speaker can't deliver his caucus, what's the point in having that person as speaker?
So is John Boehner still relevant as speaker, especially when it comes to negotiating big ticket items with the White House or with Senate leaders? Or
well, one could argue he's relevant, but you got to take it with a grain of salt.
One anecdote. 2 days ago, you had Peter King cursing and pounding the podium, in defiance of what the speaker did. And today or yesterday, he came out with a statement that basically said, Boehner's a good guy, I support him, and he ended up voting for him. So if anecdotes tell a story, that's a pretty powerful one.
Yeah, it is a little like the witness in the stand who all of a sudden is, I never met that man, I've never seen him before. Right. It was telling a very different story. So that's clearly a plus in terms of Boehner's effectiveness to get people in line behind him. But Jeannie, going forward, if you're the White House or, if you're Mitch McConnell and you need to work out something with Republicans in the House, do you start with John Boehner or do you end with John Boehner?
Well, I think you have to start with John Boehner. The reason that he was reelected, another reason, is that there was nobody else running. I mean, there was no other potential leader for people to vote for. I mean, you had only 13 defections. That's not much. I thought it would have been more given what had just happened. And, I think John Boehner really is in a tough spot. We all recognize that. That said, I think he made some serious missteps. When you are the Speaker of the House, you need to understand you are legislating. Mitch McConnell got that. Joe Biden gets that. It seems to me that John Boehner still has not gotten that point. And you do have to bring your people along. And he is in a position he should be able to do. Listen, Bill Clinton was in the White House. He had a divided government, and he made the most of it. He has a responsibility to Republicans across this country to make the most of it. And he hasn't been able to do that, in my estimation.
But is that because he doesn't have the full support of his caucus, or?
Well, look, the House is notoriously more difficult to wrangle and manage than the Senate. right? Students of politics know that. It is a very different animal and a more difficult animal. To Mitch McConnell's credit, he was able to get Tom Coburn and Pat Toomey to vote for the fiscal cliff deal, two very conservative members. And he was able to do that in large measure because the Senate, again, is a different body than the House. So John Boehner has an unenviable job and an unenviable task of wrangling his members, and I think he's doing the best he can.
He does have an unenviable task, but part of the reason is the structure of our government. It's the two-year elections. It's those primaries that those Republicans are facing that are making them not go with their leader in many cases. We've seen no action, by the way, on any of the parts of these people to make any structural changes.
And I'm curious about that.
Not that I think we should change that, but...
And the reasoning why people are more intransigent in their positions, why they're not willing to make compromises for the greater good. And we were talking about this at some point, I think during a commercial last night. It's money in politics plays a big role. I also think it's this redistricting process that has all of these very safe Republican districts and very safe Democratic districts. If you're in a 70% Republican district, you're not afraid of losing to a Democrat in the general election. You're afraid of losing in the primary election.
I would love to see more focus put on this issue. I have long believed that money in politics is a ruse, and I think that this last election proved that. We had money coming out of the woodwork, and I would defy anyone to point to one single election where any of the super PACs or any of the money had an overwhelming persuasive say in the outcome. That said, you're exactly right when it comes to redistricting. As long as politicians are in charge of the redistricting process, you're going to get political output, and I think it's absolutely largely to blame for the partisanship that we see in the districts.
So I'll bring you back to the question in another form that I asked at the beginning of last segment. How do we get Congress to shift out of neutral and into drive? Hopefully not into reverse, if I can just kill that metaphor. But how do we get Congress to get out of the mud?
Well, as long as President Obama is talking cut, then the Republicans will be like, all right, let's do it. But if they're not the cuts that they want, or if the cuts are not drastic enough, then it's going to be a problem. And I believe you're going to have fewer Tea Party folks with this new Congress. Believe me, that's a good thing. No matter what Republicans say, that's a good thing, because now Boehner will be able to control his caucus a bit more. And my advice to the Speaker is, my God, count the votes. You got to count the votes before you bring the vote up. That's rule 101 in politics.
I think part of the answer to your question is I can't imagine that a freshman member of Congress came to the 112th Congress thinking, boy, I can't wait to fiddle around in the margins with the tax code in hopes of overcoming the fiscal cliff. That said, in the 113th Congress, you have some freshman members who have a generational opportunity to fix Social Security, to fix Medicare, to fix our immigration system. So those are big, bold things that freshman members are going to have the opportunity to address, which presumably is why they got into public service in the first place.
One last question. How much of Congress's problem is President Obama, and that either it's just intransigent opposition to President Obama, they just dislike him that much and will not institute any part of his agenda? Or is it President Obama to blame for pushing the country or pushing Congress in a more divisive pattern? I'll let y'all think about that for a little while.
Don't get me started. You already know what I think. So I'll let the other two get going on this one.
I'm trying to make eye contact with everybody else.
No, you know, I think President Obama, I think the best thing that could have happened to him, quite frankly, was getting a Republican House. I said that all along as the election was coming. He got a Republican House, and that gives you the old ability to blame if nothing goes your way.
I'm sure he'd rather have a Democratic House, though.
I'm not so sure. Why are you sure?
Because he'd be more likely to get his agenda through.
How are you sure? That's absolutely not the case, because then you have responsibility. Because when the agenda doesn't go through, who do you blame? Yourself. But that is not the case, and I think Republicans have not been able to use that to their advantage. Divided government is problematic. I'm not in favor of it. They have it right now, and they should be using it. They haven't been able to do that.
Quickly.
It's clear that legislating is not this president's strength. It's clear negotiations aren't this president's strength. I would argue those are only two of the critical skills that he lacks in being president of the United States.
So what's the Republicans' weakness? If you're pointing out the president's weaknesses, what are the Republicans' weaknesses?
That they're leaderless.
That's their only weakness.
I would say it was their only weakness. You asked me for a weakness, and I gave you a weakness. Nice try, though.
Rudderless also, I think it's a problem both at tip and tail. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to hear from this man. His name is Judge Glenn Berman. He presided over one of the most high-profile cases of last year, the trial of Darun Ravi, who was sentenced to jail time for spying on his former roommate's tryst with another man. Following the incident, that roommate, you'll remember, jumped to his death. A difficult case that captured the attention of the nation. The judge hasn't spoken out about this case until now. His exclusive interview with Fios One comes up after a quick break.